moving towards a conclusion, if you agree with this as a grim state of affairs, the question becomes, what do you do? I think the first step in the what do you do is making sure that Stephen is no longer with us as Prime Minister after October 19th. Unfortunately, that won't deal with the full problem, but it will deal with, I think, a part of the problem. And part of the problem, or a central part of the problem, is something that I think was described, pointed out well in a book about Canada's role in the Congo between 1960 and 1964 by Kevin Spooner, an academic at Wilfrid Laurier in Waterloo. And in discussing the internal files, he points to one document that lists Canadian decision makers' top 10 concerns with coming up with policy on the Congo. And he says that Canadian public opinion was not part of the top 10 concerns of Canadian decision makers, which is a profound comment on the lack of democracy in Canadian foreign policy. The population just pretty much shut out of the discussion. And I think that since 1960 and Canada's role in the assassination of Lumumba and public opinion not being part of that discussion, since 1960 there have been movements in this country that have broken down the lack of democracy on Canadian policy towards Africa. There were movements that challenged Canada's complicity with Portuguese rule in Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau through the late 60s and early 70s. There was a bigger movement that challenged Canada's complicity with apartheid South Africa in the 1970s and 1980s. And despite what the newspapers told you after Nelson Mandela died, Canada did not lead the charge against apartheid South Africa. The African governments were calling for the isolation of apartheid South Africa for more than 3 decades before Brian Mulroney finally brought in sanctions, when even those sanctions were half measures. And there were Canadians standing outside of the liquor stores calling on people not to buy South African wines for decades, calling on the liquor stores to pull those wines, etc. More recent years, there have been movements that have challenged Canada's mining operations across the continent. There have been diaspora communities that have challenged Canada's complicity with the 2006 US-Ethiopia invasion of Somalia. Diaspora communities that challenged Canadian companies like Talisman in Sudan. Diaspora communities that have challenged Canada's support for Paul Kagame in Rwanda. So there has been a process of democratizing Canadian foreign policy in Africa. Movements have done that, but it is still something that is a very select few that are dominating the discussion. And one pretty egregious example of that was our foreign policy debate a couple weeks ago, which was held by an institution funded and set up and named after Peter Munk, the founder of Barrick Gold, one of the most egregious, probably the worst Canadian mining company globally, the most abuses abroad, and our foreign policy debate is organized by his institute. Of course, mining policy was not part of the debate. So the foreign policy discussion is still very much in the hands of a small few. And that's, I think, the big picture political battle that we have, right? We have to get over the ignorance, the indifference, and the people's confusion by the dominant ideology. The vast majority of people are confused, ignorant, indifferent, and we have to figure out ways of changing that, building critical consciousness of Canadian foreign policy, building the political organizations that will challenge Canadian foreign policy and that will build the critical consciousness. This is not a 1 year, multiple year process, not even a decade long process. This is going to be a much longer political struggle. But I believe it's a political struggle that can have an impact and can lead to a more just-oriented Canadian foreign policy. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.